The observation post on the fringe of known space was a silent, sterile tomb of humming machines and pale blue light. Here, Elara, the lioness of the Sirius arm, watched the end of her people. On the main viewer, the terrifying, beautiful silhouettes of the Draxan Conclave's warships, like obsidian serpents coiled around a jewel, blockaded her homeworld of Lyria. They were dragons of legend made real, their scales replaced with quantum-plated armor, their breath a plasma that could scorch continents. For 3 cycles, the Lyrian stellar fleet had burned itself against that wall. Ship after ship, hero after hero. Now, only silence echoed from the comms, and the last defense platforms were dying, bright sparks against the dark. Elara was not meant to be a spectator. She was a commodore, a war leader, her reputation built on a ferocity in battle that had earned her the title from both allies and enemies. But a political command, a strategic oversight role, had placed her here, light years away, as her civilization choked. Her claws, elegantly curved, black-tipped extensions of her digitigrade legs, clicked a feudal rhythm on the deck. Her tawny fur, usually immaculate, was matted with stress. Her large, amber eyes, slitted like a great cat's, reflected only the cold stars and colder defeat. A proximity chime, soft yet jarring, broke her despair. An unknown signature, small and primitive, was entering the system, not from Lyrian or Draxan space, but from the uncharted, turbulent region known as the Veil. The sensor analysis was laughable. A fusion torch drive, primitive radiation shielding, a hull composition of basic titanium alloys. A pre-FTL vessel, a child's toy compared to the galactic powers. It was on a trajectory that would, in a few hours, skirt the edge of the Draxan blockade. Her first officer, a seasoned veteran named Kale, sighed. A lost explorer from some backwater. They'll be vaporized if they stray too close. The Draxan don't bother with warnings. Elara watched the blip. A part of her, the tired commander, agreed. Let be a quick, unnoticed death. But another part, the core that made her the Lioness, rebelled. To die without choice, without even knowing why, was an obscenity. Open a channel on the old emergency bands. Broad spectrum. Maybe they'll listen. The message was simple, a repeating loop of basic mathematical constants, and a graphic warning of the danger ahead. For an hour, there was no response. Then, a signal returned. It was audio only, crackling with static, and in a language the translation matrix struggled with. It resolved into a single, young, unmistakably curious voice. Hello, this is the Earthly Endeavor, mission, call it Delta. We read your warning. Thanks. Who are you? Human. The database identified the linguistic roots. A species barely past their own atmosphere, only recently deemed too primitive for formal contact. Elara responded, her voice a low growl she tried to soften. You're approaching a war zone. The forces present will destroy your vessel. Alter your course immediately. A war zone. The voice, belonging to someone identified as Leo, sounded awestruck, not afraid. We're on a long-range stellar survey. Our sensors are kind of basic. We just see big stuff. Are those ships? Before Elara could issue a more forceful command, the tactical display flared. A lone Draxan picket destroyer, a sleek dagger of a ship, had detached from the main formation. It was moving to intercept the human vessel. Standard procedure. Eliminate potential witnesses, however insignificant. Human vessel. Earthly Endeavor. Power down everything except life support. Do not transmit. You have been targeted. Elara barked, her body tensing. Leo's voice remained frustratingly calm. Targeted? By who? Why? Because they can. Kale snapped, unable to contain himself. On the screen, the Draxan ship closed in. It didn't even bother with its main weapons. A single, focused beam of emerald energy lanced out, a surgical strike meant to puncture the primitive hull and vent its atmosphere. It should have been the end, but it wasn't. The human ship, with a sudden, jerky burst from its maneuvering thrusters, twitched. The beam grazed its side, shearing off a sensor array, but missing the main hull. The movement was clumsy, desperate, born of pure reaction, but it was effective. Whoa, okay, that was hostile. Leo's voice finally held a note of alarm. The Draxon ship, perhaps amused by the insect's dodge, fired again. And again, the earthly endeavor moved, not with grace, but with a chaotic, unpredictable energy. It rolled, pitched, and yawed in sequences that made no tactical sense to Alera's battle computer, which predicted optimal evasion patterns. This was pure instinct, a frantic dance of survival. They're not following any evasion protocols, Kale muttered, fascinated despite himself. Alera watched, her strategic mind, honed by decades of rigid Lyrian doctrine, struggling to process the anarchic movement. It was inefficient, wasteful of fuel, but terrifyingly hard to pin down. The third Draxon shot connected, however, tearing into the human ship's engine housing. A plume of coolant and debris fountained into the void. We're hit, losing primary thrust. Leo's voice was strained, going for a hard burn on secondaries. Can you help? The plea hung in the air. Alera looked at the Lyrian blockade, at the hundreds of Draxon dragons waiting. To reveal her post, to fire, would be suicide. It would accomplish nothing but 2 deaths instead of 1. Her duty was to remain hidden, to gather intelligence for a resistance that would never form. But the Lioness saw not a primitive vessel, but a being fighting to live with a raw, untutored tenacity her own culture had lost. She saw the spirit of Lyria, before the doctrine and the despair. Bring the particle lance online. Silent charge. Single shot. Alera commanded, her voice quiet and final. Commodore, that will give away our position. The entire picket line will be on us in minutes. I am aware. Do it. The observation post, a scientific vessel with one modest defensive weapon, hummed with power. On the screen, the Draxon ship, confident now, moved in for the kill. Alera took manual control, her claws delicate on the interface. She aimed not for the ship's heart, but for a vulnerable cluster of sensor spines on its dorsal side. She fired. A bolt of concentrated protons, invisible in the vacuum, flashed across the distance. It struck true. The Draxon ship shuddered, its precise formation thrown off, its targeting systems momentarily blinded and confused. Human now, burn everything you have left towards these coordinates. Alera transmitted a vector that led not to her, but past her, into the dense asteroid field at the system's edge. You must lose them in the chaos. Go! The crippled earthly endeavor, trailing sparks and gas, lurched forward on a single remaining thruster, limping towards the tumbling rocks. The damaged Draxon ship, recovering, fired a volley of seeking missiles after it. Alera watched, her heart a drum. The human ship weaved into the asteroid field, the missiles following. Then, on the viewer, she saw Leo's ship cut its engine completely, becoming a dark, cold rock among rocks. The missiles, confused by the sudden silence and the dense mass, began to detonate against asteroids or each other in a series of silent flashes. The Draxon destroyer hovered at the field's edge, scanning. After a long minute, it turned away, presumably logging the target as destroyed. It returned to its formation. Silence returned to the observation post. They were safe for now. The post remained undetected. Kale let out a breath he'd been holding. A lucky, foolish stunt. The human is dead in that field. Drifting. Alera continued to watch the asteroid belt. Her sensors, finely tuned, picked up a faint, intermittent beacon. Not a distress call, but a simple, repeating pulse. A location ping. It was clever, low power, easily mistaken for background radiation. The youngster was alive, and he was signaling. Not for help to his home, which was too far to hear. He was signaling to her. She made a decision. Prepare the long-range shuttle. Minimal crew. You are in command of the post, Kale. Alera, you cannot be serious. To what end? To rescue a primitive from a grave he's already halfway in? It's a tactical absurdity. She turned, her amber eyes glowing in the dim light. For 3 cycles, We have fought the dragon with the mind of a strategist, and we have lost. That youngster out there fought it with the heart of a prey animal that refuses to be prey. He altered his fate. Perhaps he can alter ours. I'm going to make a connection. The interior of the human vessel, the earthly endeavor, was a claustrophobic jungle of exposed wiring, mismatched panels, and the sharp, metallic scent of ozone and burnt insulation. Gravity was a sporadic luxury provided by spinning sections now stilled, leaving Leo Morgan, a young astrophysicist and mission specialist, floating amidst the ruins of his mission. He was pale, with a shock of unruly brown hair stuck to his forehead with sweat, and his hands, wrapped in makeshift bandages from tackling a ruptured conduit, trembled slightly. He wasn't a soldier. He was a scientist who'd won a lottery ticket to the stars, only to find a dragon waiting. When the airlock of his ship cycled with a foreign, heavy thunk, his heart tried to escape his chest. He clutched a titanium torque wrench, a pathetic weapon. The inner door hissed open. Alara filled the aperture. To Leo, she was an impossibility. Over 7 feet tall, her form was a powerful blend of feline grace and humanoid structure, covered in short, tawny fur. A mane of darker, russet hair framed a face with striking amber, slitted eyes. She wore a form-fitting gray environmental suit, but her clawed feet and hands were bare, looking both elegant and deadly. She was majestic and terrifying. For a long moment, they stared at each other, two creatures from different branches of the Tree of Life, meeting in a tomb of metal. Leo broke the silence, his voice a squeak he tried to control. "So, you're the Lioness." Alara's ear twitched, a gesture the translator didn't catch. She scanned the wreckage, the jury-rig systems keeping the air breathable. "And you're the youngster who dodges like a startled Grishnak. Your beacon was clever. You came." He lowered the wrench, feeling foolish. "I didn't think. Thanks. For before. The shot. It was a tactical decision," she said, though the words felt hollow, even to her. She moved with fluid ease in the zero-G, her claws finding purchase on surfaces Leo would have slid from. "Your vessel is non-operational. Life support is failing. You have approximately 12 hours of power left in your emergency cells." Leo nodded, a wave of despair crashing over him. "I know. I was working on it." He gestured to a spaghetti tangle of cables, trying to cross-route the carbon scrubbers through the navigation battery. "It's not going well." Alara observed his attempts. They were chaotic, illogical by Lyrian engineering standards, yet showed a bizarre, intuitive understanding of the systems as a whole, not as discrete units. He was treating the ship like a living patient, not a machine. "Your methodology is inefficient," she stated then, to her own surprise, moved to a shattered console. "This regulator is fried. You are attempting to bypass its function, but the voltage variance will overload the secondary processing cluster within an hour." Her claws, delicate and precise, began to disconnect and reroute lines with a speed that left Leo breathless. "You know our systems?" he asked, amazed. "I know systems. Energy flows where is permitted. Your design is oddly simplistic. It has a certain crude elegance." She worked in silence for a minute. "There. You have 40 hours of stable air. Now come." "Come where?" "To my shuttle. Then to my post. You cannot stay here." Leo's stubbornness, the same that had made him apply for a 1 in a billion mission to the stars, surfaced. "And then what? I'm your prisoner?" "A specimen." Alara turned, her gaze intense. "You are a witness, and an anomaly. The Draxen believe you are destroyed. If they discover otherwise, they will scour this system until they find you, and anyone with you. My people are dying, human. My world is under siege. I have no time for cages. I need a new perspective." The raw pain in her voice, so at odds with her regal, powerful presence, cut through Leo's fear. He looked around his dying ship, the dream he'd worked for all his life. Then, he looked at this warrior from the stars, who had risked everything to save a stranger. He grabbed a small data solid containing his mission logs and personal files floating over to a family photo stuck to a console with magnetic tape. He pocketed it. "Okay," he said simply. The journey to the observation post in Alera's sleek, stealth shuttle was a silent one. Leo stared, wide-eyed, at the vistas of space, the distant, menacing shapes of the Draxan blockade around the beautiful blue-green orb of Lyria. The scale of the conflict dwarfed any human war. At the post, he was met with cold suspicion from Kale and the small Lyrian crew. He was a primitive, a burden, a danger. They gave him a small, spare quarters and left him alone. But Leo didn't stay put. His curiosity was boundless. He wandered, observing everything. He saw the Lyrian strategic displays, the elegant, predictable patterns of their fleet movements, all ending in red symbols of destruction. He saw the Draxan tactics, overwhelming, brutal, and equally patterned. It was a game of galactic chess, and the Draxan were grandmasters. Days passed. Alera spent most of her time on the command deck, brooding over the inevitable. Leo, using his limited access, began running simulations on a spare terminal. He wasn't trained in war, but in physics, in chaos theory, in the behavior of complex systems. One evening, he found Alera in the quiet mess hall, staring at a nutrient paste as if it were ash. "Your fleet," he began tentatively. "They always attack in phalanx formation Delta 3, right?" Alera glanced at him, annoyed. "It is the formation with the optimal overlap of shield and firepower. The Draxan counter it with plasma lance envelopment. They have superior range and yield. We cannot break through." "But it's so predictable," Leo said, pulling out a datapad where he'd drawn crude diagrams. "Look, you see the fight as a wall against a wall. But what if it's not a wall? What if it's a swarm? Or a fluid? Fluid dynamics do not win space battles, human. But they do." Leo's passion spilled over. He pulled up a simulation he'd been tinkering with. "I've been modeling the energy signatures of your thrusters and the Draxan plasma. The plasma, once fired, has a cohesive magnetic field. Stable. But if you introduce a high-frequency, low-energy particle burst, like from your comms array, tuned to a specific resonance, at the moment of impact on your shields, it could induce a localized destabilization. It wouldn't stop the shot, but it might make it splash unevenly, like hitting a wave, not a wall. It could create gaps, not in your shield, but in the coverage of their fire." Alera stared at the simulation. It was preposterous. It violated every principle of shield modulation. It was not a weapon, but a trick, a youngster's trick. And then Leo continued, excited. "Instead of your ships holding formation to maximize collective shield strength, what if at that exact moment, a small, fast squadron breaks towards a splash through the momentarily diffused fire? Not to attack the main ships, but to harry their sensor arrays, their point defense clusters. Like mosquitoes on a rhino. Annoying, distracting, forcing them to adjust, to split their attention." He was describing not a battle of strength, but of nuisance, of chaos. It was the same principle as his desperate dodging in the asteroid field. Be unpredictable, be annoying, survive. Alera's mind, a fortress of classical strategy, felt a crack. It was insane. It was undignified. It was not something the Draxan would expect. The dragon was used to fighting other dragons or disciplined prey. It was not used to fighting a buzzing, stinging, chaotic insect that refused to follow the rules of the duel. She looked from the simulation to Leo's eager, grimy face. He held no answers. He held a different question. For the first time in cycles, a spark that was not defiance, but hope flickered in the Lioness's eyes. "Show me more," she commanded, her voice a low rumble. The command deck of the observation post was now a strange hybrid of Lyrian precision and human improvisation. Data pads with Leo's hand-drawn schematics and chaotic equations littered the pristine consoles. The crew, initially hostile, watched with grudging fascination as their Commodore engaged in intense, almost frantic discussions with the youngster. Alera had taken Leo's core idea, the resonant destabilization of incoming plasma, and weaponized it with Lyrian engineering. They dubbed it the Scatterpulse. It wasn't a shield, but a shield disruptor for enemy fire. Meanwhile, Leo, with an outsider's lack of reverence for tradition, pored over the specs of the remaining Lyrian forces. He focused not on the mighty battlecruisers, but on the small, fast Stinger-class corvettes, often used for reconnaissance. They were considered expendable, their weapons too weak to pierce Draxan hulls. But they're agile, Leo insisted, pointing to their thruster profiles. And see these old sensor pods? They can be modified to emit the scatterpulse. They don't need to kill. They just need to get in close, pulse the big ship's incoming volleys to create splash zones, and then zip around, targeting external systems, sensor blisters, communication relays, secondary weapon mounts. Kale was dismissive. It is a tactic of irritation, not victory. The Draxan will simply swat them aside. Maybe, Ilera said, her gaze fixed on the tactical hollow of the blockade. But, to swat, they must take their eyes off the main threat. And we have one final asset. She zoomed in on a faint signal deep within the Lyrian asteroid belt. The Valor's Heart. It was a legend, a ghost. A Lyrian dreadnought, the sister ship to the fleet's flagship, believed destroyed in the first wave of the war. Its last known transmission was a distress beacon from the belt. Scans now confirmed it was there, crippled but largely intact, its crew in cryo-sleep, its main weapon, a planet cracker kinetic lance, potentially still operational. It was a sleeping giant. The Draxan think it's dead slag, Ilera explained to Leo. Their blockade is focused on the planet and the approach lanes. The asteroid belt is a blind spot, monitored only by patrols. If we can wake the heart, even for one shot, we can punch a hole in the blockade. Leo finished, his eyes wide. But how we get to it? And how do we coordinate all this? The moment we transmit a complex plan, the Draxan will hear it. A slow, cunning smile touched Ilera's lips, a gesture that showed just a hint of sharp canine. We do not transmit a plan. We transmit a story of desperation. Her scheme was audacious. They would use the observation post's powerful, stealthy comms array to send a tightly beamed, coded signal to the known resistance cells on Lyria. The message would not contain attack vectors or timing. It would contain a piece of music. Leo was baffled. Music? A traditional Lyrian war chant, the dirge of broken stars, Ilera explained. But we will overlay it with a specific, subtle harmonic distortion, the resonance frequency of the scatterpulse. To any Draxan listener, it will sound like a mournful, hopeless broadcast, a dirge for a dying world. Poetic. They may even allow it to play, to demoralize further. But to our people, the distortion will be a key. They will analyze it, and our best engineers will understand its purpose. And the attack? Leo asked. The chant has 7 movements. The attack begins at the crescendo of the 5th. A time signature, not clock time. It is in our blood. The next 48 hours were a blur of sleepless activity. Leo worked alongside Lyrian technicians, his intuitive, problem-solving approach meshing strangely well with their methodical expertise. He showed them how to jury-rig the Stinger corvette systems for the Pulse, using parts cannibalized from damaged fighters in the post hangar. Ilera drilled the skeleton crew on the new, chaotic maneuvers, forcing them to unlearn a lifetime of disciplined formation flying. It was uncomfortable, messy, and fueled by a desperate, shared hope. The day arrived. Ilera stood on the command deck in her battle armor, a sleek, golden-hued carapace that made her look even more like a legendary beast. Leo, in a hastily fitted Lyrian environment suit that was too tall for him, stood beside her, a nervous but determined datapad in hand. "You should stay here," Ilera said, not unkindly. "And miss the show?" Leo tried to sound brave, his voice cracking slightly. "Besides, who's going to fix your scatterpulse emitter when it inevitably overloads because someone," he glanced at Kale, "didn't calibrate the secondary capacitor?" Kale snorted, but there was no malice in it. Ilera placed a heavy, clawed hand on Leo's shoulder. "Then, you are part of the pride, youngster. Stay on the shuttle comms. Listen, and think." The observation post fell silent as the stealth shuttle, carrying Alara, Leo, and a handful of volunteers detached and shot towards the asteroid belt. Behind them, the post began its final, fateful broadcast. The haunting, sorrowful notes of the dirge of broken stars, woven with a hidden, sharp-toothed frequency, pulsed out towards Lyria. On the planet, in hidden bunkers, resistance technicians heard it. They heard the sorrow, but their instruments also heard the scream within the song. They understood. In the shuttle, racing through the dark, they watched the tactical feed. For a long, tense hour, nothing. The Draxan blockade hung, serene and terrible. Then, on the edge of the sensor sphere, a flicker. Then another. Dozens of small, fast signatures, the Stinger corvettes, risen from hidden bases on moons and in planetary debris, erupted from the shadows. They didn't form a wall. They erupted like a swarm of angry hornets, heading straight for the Draxan lines. The Draxan reacted with contempt. A wall of plasma fire lanced out to meet them. And then the impossible happened. At the moment of impact, the plasma bolts shimmered, distorted, and fanned out in wild, uncontrolled sprays. The coordinated volley became a chaotic storm. Several Stingers were still caught and vaporized, but many more shot through the gaps, their own weak lasers lashing out not at hulls, but at the delicate external organs of the great dragons. The Draxan formation, for the first time, showed confusion. Ships began to turn, to deal with the stinging pests scrambling their sensor pictures and communications. The flawless wall developed ripples. Now, Alara whispered, as the hidden shuttle dove into the asteroid belt, heading for the dormant Valor's heart. The dragon is distracted. It is time for the lion to bite. The crippled dreadnought Valor's heart was a cathedral of grief frozen in the dark. Its vast halls, designed for a crew of thousands, were silent save for the hum of failing systems and the soft glow of emergency lights reflecting off icy surfaces. Row upon row of cryopods held the still forms of Lyria's finest, sleeping through their ship's death. Alara's shuttle docked with a shuddering clang against a ruptured access bay. The team, armed with cutting tools and determination, forced their way in. Leo followed, his suit lights piercing the absolute blackness, revealing scars of battle, melted bulkheads, frozen air that sparkled like tragic diamonds, the silent, floating forms of those who hadn't made it to the pods. Their goal was engineering, deep in the ship's heart. The path was a treacherous maze of debris and dormant, potentially hostile security systems. Alara led with a predator's grace, her claws and strength clearing obstacles Leo would have found impossible. He, in turn, used his small size and a technician's intuition to worm through collapsed ducts and bypass shattered control panels, rerouting power to sealed doors. As they worked, they monitored the battle outside. The swarm tactic was working better than hoped, but at a horrific cost. The Stinger corvettes were being annihilated, but with every one lost, they bought seconds of confusion, chipping away at the Draxan's flawless coordination. On Lyria, the main remnant of the fleet, guided by the hidden signal in the dirge, had rallied. They weren't attacking the main blockade wall head-on. Instead, they were executing a series of feints and rapid strikes at the points where the swarm had caused the most disruption, like wolves testing a wounded bull. The dragon was not slain, but it was annoyed. And an annoyed dragon, as Alara had hoped, was a distracted one. Finally, they reached main engineering. The chamber was dominated by the silent, cold cylinder of the kinetic lance's primary accelerator. The control throne was empty, the chief engineer's body still strapped in, a statue of heroic sacrifice. Alara went to the main system's console, her claws flying over the interfaces, running reactivation sequences. The core is stable. Cryo-life support is nominal. We can wake the crew, she reported, a tremor of emotion in her voice. But the weapons systems, the primary power coupling was severed in the battle. It will take hours to repair. We do not have hours. Leo was already scanning the room, his light falling on the mammoth, broken coupling, A trunk-thick conduit of crystalline energy channeling snapped clean. Standard procedure would be to remove and replace. They had neither the part nor the time. His eyes darted around, landing on the shuttle's system schematic on his datapad. Then, on the Dreadnought's massive, secondary plasma conduits that fed the sublight engines. An insane idea, born of a childhood of fixing broken hoverbikes with spit and hope formed. "We don't fix it," he said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "We bypass it." Alara stared at him. The energy required for a single lance shot would vaporize any makeshift connection. "Not if we don't try to channel it all the way," Leo said, scrambling towards a bank of engineering lockers. "We used the shuttle. We landed in the Lance's ejection chamber, the big tube where the projectile loads. We hardwire the shuttle's fusion core directly into the Lance's firing magnetosphere, using the shuttle's hull as a giant surge capacitor. We turn the shuttle itself into the firing pin." It was the most reckless, stupid, beautiful thing Alara had ever heard. It would almost certainly destroy the shuttle and kill anyone inside. But it would, for a microsecond, provide the monstrous surge of power needed to prime the Lance for one shot. The Dreadnought's own reactors could then fire it. The shuttle's systems will be fried. The pilot, Kale, who was with them, said quietly. "I'll do it," Leo said, the words out of his mouth before he fully processed them. "I'm the only one who knows the hack. The power routing sequence is fiddly." "No." Alara's voice was final, a growl that brooked no argument. "You have done enough. This is a warrior's task." "With all respect, Commodore," Leo said, meeting her amber gaze, his young face pale but set. "This isn't about being a warrior. It's about being a mechanic. And this is my fix." The silence between them was heavy. Outside, on the monitors, they saw a Lyrian cruiser, emboldened by the chaos, make a run at a Draxan command ship. It was blown apart, but its sacrifice drew 2 more Draxan vessels out of position. The hole in the blockade was widening, but beginning to close again as the Draxan High Command reasserted control. Time was up. Alara saw not a youngster, but the spirit that had dodged destruction in an asteroid field. The spark that had lit this impossible fire. She gave a single, sharp nod. "Kale, get the crew awakening sequence started. Get them to battle stations. I will assist Leo." While Kale worked frantically at the cryo controls, Alara and Leo raced back to the shuttle. They guided it, flying manually, into the vast, dark maw of the kinetic Lance's loading chamber. Inside, they worked in a frenzy, Leo directing, Alara using her strength to tear open panels and forge connections with welding tools and brute force. They linked the shuttle's core to the Dreadnought's weapon, a grotesque technological graft. Finally, it was done. Leo sat in the pilot's seat, running the final sequence. A countdown flashed on his screen, 60 seconds to capacitor overload and magnetic priming. "You must eject, Alara. Now," he said, not looking at her. She stood in the shuttle's doorway. The gulf between them, species, age, experience, meant nothing. "You have the heart of a lion, Leo of Earth," she said softly. Then, she was gone, the airlock sealing behind her. Alone in the dark, Leo watched the countdown. 30, 20. He thought of his family, of blue skies, of his simple dream to see the stars. He hadn't imagined this. 10, 5. He closed his eyes. A colossal, deep-throated thrum shook the universe. Not an explosion, but the sound of a giant waking. The shuttle dissolved in a flash of contained stellar fire, its energy perfectly channeled. Deep within the Valor's heart, systems that had been dark for cycles blazed to life. On the bridge, the awakened crew, dazed but responding to years of drilled instinct, saw the weapon's status flash green. The targeting computer, linked to the observation post feeds, locked onto the keystone of the Draxan blockade, the massive, carrier-like command vessel at the formation center. The Lioness, now back on the Dreadnought's bridge, her voice roaring across the newly opened comms to every Lyrian ship, gave the order. For Lyria, fire. The kinetic lance fired. It was not an energy beam, but a spear of solidified tungsten fired at a fraction of light speed. It crossed the distance silently, unforgivingly. It struck the Draxan command ship not with a flash, but with an awful, sudden displacement. The ship didn't explode. It simply came apart, as if a god had taken an eraser to its center. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic for the Draxan. The central mind of the blockade was gone. Coordination shattered. The remaining ships, suddenly leaderless, began to react individually, some pressing the attack, others pulling back to regroup. For the Lyrian fleet, it was the signal, the crescendo. With a united roar that crossed the void, they surged forward, not in a wall, but in the chaotic, aggressive, stinging swarm they had practiced. They poured through the shattered gap. The battle was not over, but its fate was altered. The dragon's neck was broken. Hours later, amidst the drifting wreckage and the fleeing remnants of the Draxan armada, Alara stood on the bridge of the Valor's Heart, now the flagship of a liberated Lyria. Her heart was a storm of triumph and grief. They had won the day, but at a cost etched in fire and names. A technician approached. "Commodore, we are receiving a weak, repeating signal from the forward asteroid field. It's on an old, pre-FDL emergency band. It's a simple numerical sequence. A location." Alara's breath caught. She knew that signature. The shuttle's emergency beacon, designed to eject upon catastrophic failure. It must have been blasted clear in the priming surge. She didn't order a rescue team. She went herself. She found the small, scorched capsule lodged in a canyon of ice. The hatch was warped. She tore it open with her claws. Inside, curled in smoke and spent coolant, was Leo. His suit was blackened, his face smudged, but the vitals on his chest panel flickered weakly. Alive. He coughed, opening his eyes. They focused on her, and a tired, lopsided grin spread across his face. "Told you it was a fiddly sequence," he croaked. "Overloaded the secondary capacitor." A sound escaped Alara, a rough, rumbling noise that was part laugh, part sob. She carefully gathered the young human, this strange, brilliant, brave youngster from a world that knew nothing of dragons or lionesses, into her arms. He was light, fragile, and had just helped move the heavens. "Come, youngster," she murmured, her voice thick. "Let's go home. Both of our homes have much to learn from each other." As she carried him back to the shuttle, the stars around them no longer seemed like cold, distant points. They looked like possibilities. The connection was made. The dragon had been wounded. The lioness had found a new way to fight. And the youngster from Earth had taught them that fate was not a wall to be broken, but a lock to be picked with the right, unexpected key.